The Mafia boss's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a single mother did the unthinkable. The infant's screams pierced through the first-class cabin like shattered glass, relentless and desperate. Every passenger within earshot winced, shifted uncomfortably, or shot irritated glances toward the source of the disturbance. But none dared to complain. Not when they saw the man holding the child. Vincent Romano sat rigidly in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. The custom-tailored black suit that normally made him look like a dark angel now seemed to constrict around him like a prison. His normally cold, calculating eyes held a flicker of something foreign. Raw, unfiltered panic. The baby, his son, continued to wail, tiny fists flailing against Vincent's chest. 2 months old, and already bearing the weight of a crown he didn't ask for. 2 months since Sophia had taken her last breath bringing this child into the world. 2 months since Vincent Romano, the most feared man in the American underground, had become something he never thought possible. Helpless, one of his bodyguards leaned in carefully, speaking low enough that other passengers couldn't hear. "We could land early. Find a no." Vincent's voice was still wrapped in silk. "We stay on schedule." But the baby didn't care about schedules. He didn't care that his father controlled half the East Coast's criminal operations. That men crossed streets to avoid his shadow. That entire families had disappeared at his word. The infant only knew hunger, discomfort, and the absence of the warmth he'd known for 2 precious months before it was stolen away. Vincent had tried everything. Bottles prepared by the nanny who waited at their destination. Pacifiers that the child spat out with surprising force. Rocking motions that felt awkward in his arms that were more accustomed to signing death warrants than soothing cries. Nothing worked. 3 rows ahead, Rachel Carter heard the desperate cries and felt her body respond instinctively. Her breasts act with sympathetic letdown, milk threatening to soak through the nursing pads she still wore, despite the fact that she closed her eyes, forcing down the wave of grief that always came with that thought. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she'd held her own daughter. 6 months since the tiny heart had simply stopped beating in the night. No explanation, no warning. Sudden infant death syndrome, the doctors had said, as if putting a name to the nightmare made it hurt less. Rachel had been heading home from a grief counseling conference in New York, trying to put her shattered life back together. She was a pediatric nurse, or at least she had been. After losing Lily, she couldn't bring herself to return to the NICU. Couldn't watch other people's babies thrive while hers lay cold in the ground. The crying intensified, and Rachel felt tears prick her own eyes. She knew that sound, the desperate, hungry wail of an infant who needed something primal, something only a mother could provide. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armrests. "Miss, are you all right?" The flight attendant paused beside her, concerned. Rachel looked up, then back toward where the crying originated. "That baby. He sounds I'm a nurse. Maybe I can help." The attendant's expression shifted to something between relief and skepticism. "The passenger has been quite firm about not wanting assistance. But if you'd like to try, I suppose it couldn't hurt." Rachel unbuckled her seat belt before she could second-guess herself, following the attendant down the aisle. With each step, her heart pounded harder. This was insane. She was still lactating. Her body hadn't gotten the memo that there was no longer a baby to feed. But she couldn't just offer to breastfeed a stranger's child, could she? Then she saw him. Vincent Romano sat like a king on a throne, even in distress. Black hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by an angry god. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened by precisely maintained stubble, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore power like a second skin, and danger rolled off him in ways that made her survival instincts scream to turn around. But the baby in his arms looked so small, so helpless against that broad chest. The infant's face was red from crying, tiny features scrunched in misery. "Sir," the flight attendant began nervously. "This passenger is a nurse." She wondered if she might. Vincent's gaze snapped to Rachel, and she felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes could strip flesh from bone, could make grown men confess sins they hadn't even committed. For a moment, Rachel forgot how to breathe. "A nurse," he repeated, his voice low and rough like gravel wrapped in velvet. An accent lingered at the edges. Italian probably, though Americanized by years in the States. Pediatric, Rachel heard herself say, though her voice sounded far away. I know that cry. He's hungry. I've tried the bottle. Frustration cracked through Vincent's controlled exterior. He won't take it. Rachel's eyes moved from the man to the baby, and something in her chest cracked open. The infant's cries had taken on a desperate edge, the kind that spoke of real distress. She'd heard it too many times in the NICU, and her body responded before her brain could catch up. Some babies won't take artificial nipples, she said softly, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to run from this dangerous man. Especially if they were breastfed initially. He was his mother. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. A flash of such raw pain that Rachel caught her breath. She died, he said flatly. 8 weeks ago, giving birth to him. The cabin seemed to go silent around them, though the baby still cried. Rachel's eyes burned with unshed tears. Her grief recognizing his even as her nurse's training kicked in. Then he's probably refusing the bottle because he's looking for something familiar, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something he associates with comfort and safety. Their eyes locked, and Rachel saw the exact moment he understood what she was implying. His jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he might order her away. But then the baby let out another desperate wail, and something in the untouchable Mafia boss crumbled. Are you offering what I think you're offering? His voice was dangerous testing, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Rachel swallowed hard. This was beyond insane. But the baby was suffering, and her body was producing milk that had nowhere to go. And maybe, just maybe, she could help this tiny life even though she'd failed to save her own. I'm still producing, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. I lost my daughter 6 months ago. My body hasn't. I haven't been able to stop it. If you'd allow me, I could try. The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger in first class had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something profound, even if they couldn't quite understand what. Vincent Romano stared at this woman, this stranger who had just offered the most intimate gift one human could give another, and felt the ground shift beneath him. In his world, there were no gifts. Everything had a price. Every kindness hit a blade. But this woman's eyes held only compassion and a grief that mirrored his own. The restroom, he said abruptly, standing with fluid grace despite the child in his arms. It's more private. Rachel's heart hammered as she followed him toward the first-class lavatory, acutely aware of the bodyguard who fell into step behind them. This was real. This was actually happening. The bathroom was small but luxurious, as an airplane bathroom could be. Vincent stood in the doorway, his large frame taking up most of the space, hesitation written across features that probably hadn't shown uncertainty in years. I'll wait outside, he said finally, his voice rough. Unless you need, I'll be fine, Rachel assured him, though her hands shook as she reached for the baby. What's his name? The word came out like a prayer and a curse. After my grandfather. Rachel took the infant carefully, cradling his small body against her chest. Antonio's cries had diminished to hiccuping whimpers, as if he sensed something was about to change. She looked up at Vincent, at this dangerous, powerful man who had just entrusted her with his most precious possession, and saw vulnerability that took her breath away. I'll take care of him, she promised. Vincent nodded once, sharp and controlled, then stepped back to let her close the door. The moment it clicked shut, Rachel felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her like a blanket. Her hands moved on autopilot, unbuttoning her blouse with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The nursing bra came next, and then she was positioning Antonio at her breast, supporting his tiny head the way she'd supported so many infants in the NICU. For a moment, nothing happened. Antonio whimpered, turning his face against her skin, searching. Then his instincts kicked in, and he latched on, and Rachel felt the familiar pull and release as he began to nurse. Tears streamed down her face, silently, as she looked down at the baby in her arms. He wasn't Lily. He would never be Lily. But he was a child who needed comfort, who needed nourishment, who needed the one thing her body was still desperate to provide. It's okay, little one, she whispered, stroking his dark hair. It's okay. Outside the door, Vincent Romano stood with his fists clenched at his sides, his bodyguard wisely maintaining distance. The silence that had replaced his son's cries was both a relief and a torment. He'd just handed Antonio to a complete stranger. He who trusted no one, who verified the background of every person who came within 10 feet of his child, had just given his son to a woman whose last name he didn't even know. But something about her had reached through the armor he'd built around himself. Maybe it was the grief in her eyes that matched his own. Maybe it was the desperate courage it took to offer such an intimate kindness to a stranger. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in 8 weeks, someone had offered to help without wanting something in return. When the bathroom door opened 15 minutes later, Rachel emerged with Antonio sleeping peacefully in her arms. The infant's face was relaxed, his tiny fist curled against her chest, completely at peace. Vincent looked at his son truly peaceful for the first time since Sophia's death and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something that in his world could get people killed. "He's asleep," Rachel said unnecessarily, her voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "He ate well. He'll probably sleep for a few hours now." She moved to hand Antonio back, but Vincent's hand shot out to stop her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising gentleness. "Your name?" he demanded, though his tone had lost its edge. "Carter. Vincent Romano." He released her wrist, taking Antonio from her arms with practiced care. His son barely stirred, too content to wake. "I owe you a debt, Rachel Carter." "You don't owe me anything." Rachel began buttoning her blouse, suddenly aware of how intimate this situation was. "I was happy to help. In my world, everything comes with a price." Vincent's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what you just did, feeding my son, giving him peace when nothing else could, that's not something I can simply walk away from." Something in his tone made Rachel's heart race with more than attraction. It sounded almost like a warning. "I should get back to my seat." The word was command, not request. Vincent shifted Antonio to one arm with the ease of someone who'd been doing this alone for weeks, then pulled a business card from his suit pocket. "Call me when we land. I want to properly thank you." Rachel took the card reflexively, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and from the slight widening of his eyes, he'd felt it, too. "That's not necessary." "It is to me." His voice had gone soft. "Dangerous. You gave my son something precious. The least I can do is buy you dinner." Rachel knew she should say no. Everything about this man screamed danger, from the way other passengers averted their eyes when he passed to the bodyguards who shadowed his movements. But there was something in his expression when he looked at his son, a vulnerability that called to her own broken heart. "Dinner." She found herself agreeing. "Just dinner." A ghost of a smile touched Vincent's lips, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. "Just dinner," he echoed, though something in his tone suggested he was making a promise neither of them understood yet. Rachel returned to her seat in a daze. The warmth of Antonio's small body still imprinted on her skin. She didn't notice the way Vincent's bodyguards were already pulling up information on her. Didn't see the calculating look in Vincent's eyes as he watched her walk away. In his world, in the world of the American Mafia, where tradition ran deeper than blood, what had just happened wasn't simple. It wasn't just a kind stranger helping a child in need. In the old ways, the ways his grandfather had taught him, the ways that still governed the ancient families, a woman who nursed a Dawn's child became bound to that family, became bound to him. Rachel Carter had just fed his son. She'd given Antonio the one thing Vincent couldn't provide, the one thing he'd been desperate for since Sophia's death. In doing so, she'd fulfilled a role that, in the traditions of their world, made her something sacred, made her his. Vincent looked down at his peacefully sleeping son and felt the ghost of his grandfather's words echo through his mind. When a woman feeds your child from her own body, she becomes the child's mother. And a Dawn's child can have only one mother, his queen. He hadn't believed in the old ways, not really. They were superstitions, traditions from a different era. But holding Antonio truly at peace for the first time since birth, Vincent felt the weight of those ancient rules settling over him like a mantle. Rachel Carter didn't know it yet, but the moment she'd offered to feed his son, she'd stepped into his world. And in his world, some things were sacred. Some bonds couldn't be broken. Some debts could only be paid one way. The plane continued its journey through the clouds, carrying two broken souls toward a destiny neither had seen coming. Rachel Carter, the pediatric nurse running from her grief, and Vincent Romano, the Mafia boss who just found something more precious than power. someone who could give his son the love of a mother. But love in his world came with a price. And that price was written in tradition older than America itself. Rachel had saved his son's life tonight. Even if she didn't realize it, Antonio had been slowly starving, refusing every bottle, growing weaker each day. The doctors had talked about feeding tubes, about hospitalization. But one act of compassion from a stranger had solved what weeks of medical intervention couldn't. And Vincent Romano always paid his debts. Always. The black SUV that picked up Rachel from the airport 2 days later was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined a normal restaurant, maybe something upscale given Vincent's obvious wealth. Instead, the driver, a mountain of a man with cold eyes and an earpiece, had escorted her into a vehicle that screamed federal protection or something darker. The windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see out, and the locks engaged with an ominous click the moment her door closed. "Where are we going?" Rachel tried to keep her voice steady as the SUV pulled into traffic. "The Dawn's estate, miss." The driver's eyes met hers in the rear-view mirror. "He thought you'd be more comfortable with a private dinner." Given the baby, the Dawn, not Vincent, not Mr. Romano, the Dawn. Rachel's stomach twisted as pieces began clicking into place. The bodyguards on the plane, the way passengers had given him a wide berth, the ease with which he commanded others, the casual use of the title Dawn, a title she knew from crime dramas and news reports about organized crime. Oh God, what had she gotten herself into? The SUV wound through the streets of Newark before heading into the suburbs, each mile taking them farther from public spaces and closer to sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they finally turned through a particular gate, this one guarded by 2 men with very obvious weapons, Rachel felt her heart climb into her throat. The estate was massive, a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of The Godfather. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, and Rachel counted at least 4 other security personnel patrolling the grounds before the SUV pulled up to the main entrance. "Miss Carter." A woman in her 60s appeared at the door, her severe expression softening slightly as she looked Rachel over. "I'm Maria, the house manager. Romano is waiting in the nursery. If you'll follow me." Nursery, right? Because this was about Antonio. Rachel clung to that thought as Maria led her through a home that belonged in Architectural Digest. Marble floors, priceless artwork, furniture that cost more than Rachel's yearly salary. Everything screamed wealth and power and danger. They climbed a grand staircase to the 2nd floor, and Rachel heard it before she saw it. Antonio's cries, not as desperate as on the plane, but still distressed. Maria opened a door to reveal a nursery that was both opulent and surprisingly warm, decorated in soft blues and silvers with a mural of clouds covering one wall. Vincent stood by the window, Antonio wailing in his arms, his expression tight with frustration. He'd shed the suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and Rachel's breath caught. Extensive tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. Not regular tattoos. These were deliberate, symbolic. She recognized a few of the images. A crown, what looked like family crests, the kind of ink that told stories in the criminal underworld. His voice was rough with relief as he turned. "Thank God. He's been asking for you. Asking for me." Rachel's voice came out higher than intended. "Vincent, what is this? Who are you really?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. Respect maybe that she was asking directly. He gestured to Maria, who slipped out silently, closing the door behind her. Suddenly, Rachel was alone with the most dangerous-looking man she'd ever met and his crying infant. "I think you already know," Vincent said quietly, still rocking Antonio. "You're smart. You've put the pieces together. You're with the Mafia." It wasn't a question. "I am the Mafia. At least I'm the head of the Romano family. We control most of the operations from here to Boston. Shipping, construction, waste management. Some legitimate, some." He paused. "Less legitimate." Rachel backed toward the door, her hand fumbling for the handle. "I need to leave. Antonio needs you." Vincent's voice stopped her, not because it was commanding, but because it was broken. "Look at him, Rachel. Really look." Against her better judgment, Rachel did. The baby in Vincent's arms was thinner than he'd been on the plane. His cries had a weak quality to them that made her nurse's instincts scream alarm. Dark circles shadowed his tiny eyes, and his skin had lost the healthy flush infants should have. "What happened?" She was moving forward before she could stop herself. He looked fine 2 days ago. He won't eat. Vincent's jaw clenched. Not the bottle, not anything. He took one bottle the night we landed, and since then, he's refused everything. The pediatrician wants to hospitalize him. Put in a feeding tube. But his voice cracked. I can't do that to him. He's already lost his mother. If I could give him what he needs, I would. But you can't. Rachel finished, understanding flooding through her. She reached for Antonio, and the moment the baby was in her arms, his cries diminished to whimpers. He turned his face against her chest, rooting instinctively. Oh, sweetheart, you're so hungry, aren't you? I'm sorry. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable. I know this isn't fair to you. I know I have no right to ask, but when I saw how he responded to you on the plane, how peaceful he was. Rachel, I haven't seen my son peaceful since the day he was born. Not once. Rachel looked from the baby in her arms to the man before her. This terrifying, powerful, dangerous man who was also a desperate father trying to save his child. She thought of Lily, of how she would have moved heaven and earth to keep her daughter alive. How she'd have begged, borrowed, or stolen anything that could have prevented that terrible morning. This is insane, she whispered. I know you're a criminal. Yes, I should run out that door and never look back. Probably, but he needs to eat. Rachel looked down at Antonio, whose whimpers had turned to hiccuping sobs as he continued to search for sustenance. And I can help him. I'll pay you. Vincent spoke quickly, urgently. Whatever you want, a salary, a house, anything. Just help him. Please. They did it. This man, who clearly wasn't used to asking for anything, who probably ruled his world with absolute authority, was begging her to save his son. Can you give us privacy? Rachel asked quietly. Vincent nodded and moved toward the door, but Rachel's voice stopped him. Wait, I need to know something first. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away, despite how intimidating he was. On the plane, you said I'd stepped into your world, that what I did created some kind of debt. What did you mean? A muscle in Vincent's jaw ticked. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Rachel thought he might not. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of tradition. My grandfather was born in Sicily. He began, his accent thickening slightly as he spoke of his heritage. He brought the old ways with him when he came to America, built this family on those traditions. One of those traditions is about children, specifically about who feeds them. I don't understand. In the old families, blood isn't the only thing that makes family. Milk does, too. Vincent's eyes were intense, burning with something Rachel couldn't name. When a woman nurses a child that isn't biologically hers, especially the child of Adon, she becomes bound to that family, becomes sacred to them. In the oldest traditions, she becomes what? Rachel's heart was pounding. The child's mother, Vincent finished. And in our world, Adon's child can have only one mother, his wife. Rachel stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said, trying to understand if he was saying what she thought he was saying. You can't be serious. I don't expect you to marry me, Vincent said quickly. This isn't medieval Sicily, but in my world, what you did on that plane, it means something. It means you're under my family's protection now, whether you want it or not. It means other families will see you as connected to us. And it means, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. It means I can't let you walk away. Can't let me. Rachel's voice rose. You don't own me. I'm not some possession you can claim because of an old superstition. It's not a superstition to the people I deal with. Vincent's voice hardened. The moment word gets out that you nursed my son, and it will get out, Rachel. Things like this don't stay secret in my world. You'll become a target. Rival families will see you as a way to get to me. You'll need protection. My protection. Then I won't do it again. Rachel held Antonio closer. Even as the baby's whimpers intensified. I'll help him today. Make sure he's eating properly. And then I'll leave. No one needs to know. Maria already knows. My driver knows. My security team knows. Vincent stepped closer, and Rachel fought the urge to back away. And in about 3 hours when my underboss comes for his weekly report, he'll know. By tomorrow, every family from here to Chicago will know that Vincent Romano's son has a wet nurse. That's how fast information travels in this world. Then tell them I'm just an employee, a hired nurse. It doesn't work like that. Frustration colored his tone. The symbolism matters. The act itself matters. You gave my son something precious, something intimate. In the eyes of the old families, that makes you precious. It makes you mine to protect. I'm not yours. But even as Rachel said it, Antonio let out a desperate cry, and she felt her body respond. Milk letting down despite her emotional state. The baby sensed it, too, rooting more frantically against her shirt. Vincent saw her cease, saw the understanding in her eyes that her body was betraying her resolve. He needs you, he said softly. And like it or not, you need me now, too. Because I promise you, Rachel Carter, the moment other families find out about this, your life will never be the same. Rachel looked down at the suffering infant in her arms, then back up at the dangerous man before her. Every rational part of her brain screamed to run, to get as far from this world as possible. But she was a nurse. She'd taken an oath to help those in need. And this baby, this innocent child who'd lost his mother the day he was born, needed her desperately. 1 week, she heard herself say. I'll stay 1 week. Help get him established on a bottle. Work with a lactation consultant to find a solution. But then I'm gone, and you tell everyone I was just a temporary medical solution. No weird mafia marriage traditions, no sacred bonds, just a professional arrangement. Vincent's expression was unreadable. 1 week, and I wanted in writing a contract that says I'm free to leave after 7 days with no retaliation, no following me, no claiming me as some kind of property. He pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer draw it up within the hour. Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned away from him, settling into the plush rocking chair positioned near the window. Privacy, she repeated. This time, Vincent left without argument, pulling the door closed behind him. Rachel heard him post someone outside. Of course he did. He probably had guards everywhere. But for now, she was alone with Antonio. Okay, little one, she whispered, unbuttoning her shirt with shaking hands. Let's get you fed. Antonio latched on immediately, his desperate suckling gradually easing into the rhythmic pull of a satisfied infant. Rachel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she rocked him. This was wrong on so many levels. She was feeding a crime lord's baby, sitting in a mansion bought with blood money, trapped by traditions older than America itself. But God, it felt right to have a baby in her arms again. To feel needed, to feel like maybe she could save this one, even though she'd failed to save Lily. Outside the door, Vincent leaned against the wall, listening to the silence that meant his son was finally eating. Finally at peace. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Franco, I need you here now, and bring the lawyer. He paused, listening to his underboss's response because we have a situation. The baby has a wet nurse. He could practically hear Franco's shock through the phone. In their world, everyone would know exactly what that meant. Yeah, Vincent continued, his voice grim. I know what the traditions say. That's why we need the lawyer. I need to figure out how to protect her without he stopped, not wanting to voice what the old ways would demand. What his grandfather would have insisted upon without question. When a woman nurses a Don's child, she becomes the Don's wife, not through ceremony or paperwork, but through an act older and more binding than any legal contract, through the sacred act of sustaining the family's heir. Vincent had told Rachel he didn't expect her to marry him, and he'd meant it. He didn't believe in forcing women into anything. Traditions be damned. But he also knew that in the eyes of every old-school family from New York to Sicily, the moment Rachel Carter had put Antonio to her breast, she'd become the Romano family's queen, whether she wanted the crown or not. And that meant Vincent had to protect her, had to claim her publicly as under his protection before rival families decided to make their own moves. Had to make it clear that touching Rachel Carter was tantamount to declaring war on the Romano family. He just had to figure out how to do that without making her hate him in the process. Inside the nursery, Rachel held Antonio as he nursed, completely unaware that she'd just become the most valuable and most dangerous woman in the American underworld. Unaware that Vincent Romano's rivals were already making plans, seeing opportunity in this unexpected development. Unaware that the man outside that door was already falling for her, drawn to her courage and compassion in ways that terrified him. Because in his world, love was a weakness. Love got people killed, but his son needed her. And increasingly, Vincent was realizing he needed her, too. 1 week, she'd said, 7 days to get Antonio eating properly, and then she'd walk away. Vincent stared at the closed nursery door and made a decision that would change everything. He'd give her the week, let her think she could leave, let her feel safe enough to lower her guard. And in that time, he'd show her that despite the darkness of his world, despite the blood on his hands, he could be what she and Antonio needed. Because 1 week wasn't going to be enough. Not nearly enough for any of them. For days into Rachel's 1 week, the mansion had become a strange kind of home. She'd been given a bedroom suite adjacent to the nursery for convenience, Maria had explained, though Rachel suspected it was more about keeping her close and secure. The rooms were beautiful, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a bathroom that had a tub large enough to swim in. Everything screamed luxury and comfort and captivity. Rachel spent most of her time in the nursery with Antonio, feeding him every 3 hours, learning his rhythms, watching him slowly regain the healthy flush that babies should have. Vincent was there for almost every feeding, sitting in the corner chair like a silent guardian, watching his son nurse with an expression that twisted Rachel's heart. He never pressured her, never crossed lines, but his presence was constant and increasingly magnetic. He's gaining weight, Rachel said on the 4th evening. Antonio sleeping peacefully in her arms after his feeding. Another few days, and he'll be strong enough to try transitioning to expressed milk in bottles. But Vincent's tone didn't sound pleased. He looked tense, wound tight. His jaw locked in that way. She was starting to recognize meant he was holding something back. What's wrong? We need to talk. He stood, moving to close the nursery door more firmly. About the situation. Rachel's stomach dropped. What situation? Word got out. He ran a hand through his hair, messing the perfectly styled black strands. About you. About what you're doing for Antonio. 3 families have already reached out, making inquiries. Polite ways of asking if I've claimed you formally. His eyes met hers. Dark and intense. If you're under my protection as just an employee or as something more. And what did you tell them? That you're mine. The words came out rough, possessive. That anyone who touches you answers to me. Rachel should have been angry. Should have railed against being called his. But something about the fierce protectiveness in his voice made her feel safe instead of trapped. So, I'm a prisoner here. You're protected here. Vincent moved closer, and Rachel's pulse quickened. There's a difference. You can leave. I signed a contract, remember. But if you leave, I can't guarantee your safety. The Benedetti family has already made noises about wanting to meet the woman nursing the Romano heir. Why would they want to meet me? Because you're valuable. He stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. In the old ways, the woman who nurses Adon's child holds almost as much power as the Don himself. She's sacred, protected, and he hesitated. And what? And if something happened to me, you and Antonio would be the logical successors to control the family. The words fell like stones between them. That makes you dangerous to my rivals and valuable to my allies. Rachel's arms tightened around the sleeping baby. This is insane. This is my world. Vincent's voice softened. I'm sorry you got pulled into it. But Rachel, he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I'm not sorry you're here. The confession hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Rachel's breath caught as she watched emotions flicker across his usually controlled face. Vulnerability wants something that looked dangerously like affection. Vincent, let me finish. He cut her off gently. These past 4 days watching you with my son, seeing him peaceful and healthy because of you. Rachel, you gave us both something I thought was lost forever. A chance at normal at family. I'm not your family. I'm just helping. You are family. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cooped her cheek with surprising gentleness. The moment you fed Antonio, you became family. Maybe not in the legal sense, maybe not in the way the modern world understands, but in the ways that matter to me, to my son. You're already ours. Rachel knew she should pull away, should remind him about their agreement, about the 3 days she had left before leaving. Should definitely not be leaning into his touch like a flower towards sunlight. This can't happen, she whispered, but her body betrayed her words, swaying closer to him. Why not? His thumb stroked her cheekbone, and Rachel felt the calluses there. Evidence that this man wasn't just a suit-wearing executive, but someone who knew how to use his hands, how to fight, how to survive. Because you're dangerous. Because your world is violent and dark, and I've already lost. Her voice broke. I can't lose anyone else. I can't watch someone else die. Understanding flooded Vincent's expression. Rachel flinched. How do you know about I had you investigated? He said it without apology. The moment you offered to feed Antonio on that plane, I had my people pull everything about you. I know about your daughter, about the SIDS diagnosis, about the fact that you haven't worked since it happened, that you've been in grief counseling, that you're rebuilding a life that feels impossible to rebuild. Rachel should have been furious about the invasion of privacy, should have slapped him and stormed out. But instead, she felt oddly relieved that he knew, that she didn't have to explain the gaping wound in her heart. Then you understand why this can't be more than a temporary arrangement, she said softly. Why I can't get attached to Antonio, or does she stop unable to finish, or to me? Vincent's jaw clenched. Rachel, I know loss. I watched Sophia die bringing our son into the world. Watched her bleed out while doctors tried everything to save her. I held her hand as the light left her eyes, knowing that I was losing my wife and my son was losing his mother before he'd even taken his first breath. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't write us off because you're scared. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. These past few days, I've watched you be so brave. Enough to feed a stranger's child. Brave enough to walk into a world you didn't understand. Brave enough to love my son, even knowing you'd have to leave him. Don't tell me you're too scared to try. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. And then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, a soft press of lips that asked permission rather than demanding surrender. Rachel froze for half a heartbeat. Antonio still sleeping in her arms. Every rational thought screaming that this was wrong. But then Vincent's hand slid into her hair, and she melted into the kiss like she was coming home. He tasted like whiskey and danger, and something uniquely him that made her head spin. His other hand came up to cradle her face, holding her like she was precious, like she was sacred. The kiss deepened, and Rachel felt 16 years of walls crumbling around her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not for a week. I can't. You can. His voice was fierce now, desperate. I need you. And unless I'm completely misreading things, you need us, too. Rachel looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then back up at the dangerous, beautiful man, offering her a life she'd never imagined. A life that terrified her. A life that somehow felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Vincent kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away. Before Rachel could respond, Antonio stirred, letting out a small whimper. She automatically began rocking him, maternal instincts kicking in. Vincent watched them, and the expression on his face stole Rachel's breath. Possessive and protective, and full of so much longing it hurt. Let me put him down, she said softly. Together, they moved to the crib, a massive thing of carved wood and soft linens that probably cost more than Rachel's car. She laid Antonio down gently, and Vincent immediately adjusted the blanket, checked the baby monitor, performed all the little rituals of a father who'd been doing this alone for 2 months. When he straightened, Rachel was right there. And suddenly, the air between them was charged again. The nursery lights were dimmed. Antonio's soft breathing, the only sound. They were alone in this bubble of domesticity. And Rachel felt the last of her resistance crumbling. I should go to my room, she said, but didn't move. You should, Vincent agreed, also not moving. We need boundaries. This is happening too fast. But when his hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer, Rachel didn't resist. When he kissed her again, deeper this time, with the hunger of a man who'd been holding back for days, she kissed him back with equal fervor. They stumbled away from the crib, mindful of the sleeping baby, until Rachel's back hit the wall, and Vincent was pressing against her, all hard muscle and controlled power. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her lips. I should, but will you? Rachel looked up into his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes that somehow made her feel safer than she had in months, and made a decision that would change everything. The word was barely out before his mouth was on hers again, and Rachel forgot all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Forgot about his criminal empire, about the danger, about the fact that she'd known him less than a week. All she could feel was his warmth, his strength, the way he held her like she was something precious he'd been searching for his whole life. When they finally broke apart, both panting, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. 3 more days, he said. Your contract gives you 3 more days before you're free to leave. If you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. I'll honor our agreement." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "But Rachel, I'm going to spend those 3 days convincing you to stay. I'm going to show you that what we could have, what we could be, it's worth the risk. And if I still want to leave." Pain flickered across his features, but he nodded. "Then I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're protected. Set up somewhere safe where the other families can't touch you, but I'll let you go." Rachel searched his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was a trap. But all she saw was honesty and a vulnerability that this powerful man probably showed to no one else. "Okay," she whispered. 3 days. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Vincent's eyes. 3 days, he repeated. Then he kissed her once more, soft and reverent, before forcing himself to step back. "Get some rest. Antonio will be hungry in a few hours." Rachel nodded, her lips still tingling from his kisses, and slipped out of the nursery. Her legs felt shaky as she walked the short distance to her room, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She'd kissed him. She'd agreed to let him try to convince her to stay. She was falling for a man who probably had more blood on his hands than she wanted to know about. But God help her. When she was in his arms, none of that seemed to matter. Rachel locked her bedroom door and leaned against it, one hand pressed to her racing heart. In 3 days, she'd either be walking away from the first man who'd made her feel alive since losing Lily, or she'd be stepping fully into a world that terrified her. She didn't know which option scared her more. Down the hall, Vincent stood in the nursery, watching his son sleep peacefully. For the first time since Sophia's death, he felt something other than guilt and grief. He felt hope. He felt the stirrings of something that might be happiness. Rachel Carter had walked into their lives like an angel, offering salvation when he'd been drowning. And now, he had 3 days to make her understand that this thing between them wasn't just about Antonio needing a mother or about ancient traditions binding them together. It was about the fact that when he looked at her, he didn't see the broken nurse running from her grief. He saw his future. He saw the woman who could stand beside him, who could be strong enough to survive in his world, who could love his son as fiercely as he did. He saw his queen. The problem was Rachel didn't see herself that way. Not yet. She still saw herself as the woman who'd failed to save her daughter, as someone too broken to take on something as big as loving them. Vincent pulled out his phone and sent a text to Franco. "Cancel all meetings for the next 3 days. I'm not to be disturbed unless the city is burning." 3 days to convince Rachel Carter that despite the darkness, despite the danger, despite every rational reason she had to run, she belonged here with them in this strange fractured family that was somehow becoming whole again. 3 days to make her fall in love with them. Vincent Romano had built an empire through force of will and ruthless determination. Surely he could win one woman's heart in 3 days. As Antonio let out a soft sigh in his sleep, Vincent made a silent vow. He would give Rachel every reason to stay and no reason to leave. He would show her the man beneath the title, the father beneath the dawn, the heart beneath the armor. And if she still chose to leave after that, then he'd have to let her go, even if it destroyed him. But first, he'd fight like hell to make her want to stay. The game was on, and Vincent Romano never lost. Not when it mattered this much. Rachel woke to chaos. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence, rattling windows throughout the mansion. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and her first thought was Antonio. She ran barefoot across the hall into the nursery, finding Vincent already there, his son clutched protectively against his chest. "What's happening?" Rachel's voice trembled. They made their move. Vincent's face was carved from stone. All vulnerability from their kiss the night before, replaced by the cold dawn she'd glimpsed on the plane. "The Benedettis. They just bombed my warehouse on the docks." Before Rachel could respond, Franco burst through the door, blood streaking his temple. "Boss, it's a distraction. They hit 3 locations simultaneously, and they left a message." He glanced at Rachel, hesitation clear. "Say it," Vincent commanded. "They want the woman. They said if you don't hand over the Romanos' wet nurse by midnight, they'll level every property you own." The room spun around Rachel. This was her fault. Her presence had painted a target on this family. "Give me to them." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "If it stops the war, no?" Vincent's voice was absolute, brooking no argument. He handed Antonio to Maria, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Take him to the safe room now. Then he was in front of Rachel, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely controlled intensity. Listen to me very carefully. You are under my protection. That means I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take you. Do you understand? Rachel saw it then. The monster everyone feared. His eyes had gone black and cold, his whole body radiating lethal intent, but his hands on her shoulders remained gentle. Even as fury rolled off him in waves. They'll kill you, she whispered. They'll try. A dangerous smile curved his lips. They'll fail, but Rachel, his expression softened fractionally. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She should say. No, should demand he let her leave. And this before more people died. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce protectiveness there, she found herself nodding. He pulled her close, pressing a hard kiss to her forehead. Franco will take you to the safe room with Antonio. Stay there until I come for you. Don't open the door for anyone else. Vincent, I'll come back. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I promise you, Rachel Carter, I will come back. We have 3 days left. Remember, I'm not done convincing you to stay. Then he was gone, barking orders into his phone as he strode from the nursery. Rachel stood frozen until Franco touched her arm gently. Miss Carter, we need to move. The safe room was deep in the mansion's basement, accessed through a hidden door in the wine cellar. It was surprisingly comfortable. A full apartment with bedrooms, kitchen, and enough supplies to last weeks. Maria was already there with Antonio, the baby miraculously still sleeping through the chaos. How long will we be here? Rachel asked as Franco secured the heavy door. However long it takes, Maria's face was grim. The dawn won't rest until every threat is eliminated. Hours crawled by. Rachel fed Antonio when he woke, her body going through the familiar motions while her mind screamed with worry. What was happening up there? Was Vincent safe? How many people were dying because of her? When Antonio finally went back to sleep in the portable crib, Rachel found herself pacing like a caged animal. Maria watched her with knowing eyes. You love him, the older woman said quietly. It wasn't a question. I barely know him. That doesn't answer my question. Rachel stopped pacing, her shoulders slumping. How can I love someone whose world is so violent? Someone who probably has blood on his hands. My husband worked for the Don's father, Maria said. 30 years in this life. It took him in the end. A rival's bullet meant for the old Don. But those 30 years, they were full of love, loyalty, and family. Yes, there was darkness. There's always darkness in this world. But there was light, too. Does the light make up for the darkness? That's for you to decide, Miss Carter. Maria stood, moving toward the small kitchen. But I'll tell you this. I've worked for the Romano family for 40 years. I've seen 3 Dons, and I've never seen one look at a woman the way Vincent looks at you, like you're his salvation. Rachel was still processing those words when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then the backup generator kicked in, bathing everything in emergency lighting. What does that mean? Rachel's voice rose with panic. Maria's face had gone pale. It means someone cut the main power. It means they're here. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them, muffled but unmistakable. Rachel ran to Antonio's crib, scooping him up protectively. The baby woke with a startled cry, sensing the tension. Then the lights went out completely. In the darkness, Rachel heard Maria move closer, heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Stay behind me, the older woman commanded. All grandmotherly warmth replaced by cold efficiency. More gunfire. Shouting, the sounds of combat filtering down through the reinforced walls. Rachel clutched Antonio tighter, tears streaming down her face as she whispered nonsense reassurances to the crying infant. This was her fault. All of it. If she just walked away on that plane, the door to the safe room shook with impact. Once, twice. Someone was trying to break through. Maria, Rachel's voice cracked. They can't get through that door, Maria assured her. But Rachel heard the uncertainty beneath the confidence. It's reinforced steel. It would take an explosion rock the room. Smaller than the warehouse blast, but devastating in the confined space. Rachel's ears rang as smoke poured through a crack that had appeared in the supposedly impenetrable door. Maria shoved Rachel toward the back of the safe room. There's an emergency exit behind the bookshelf. Take Antonio and run. What about you? I'll slow them down. Maria raised her gun, her expression resolute. Go, Miss Carter. The Don is counting on you to keep his son safe. Rachel ran, Antonio screaming in her arms, fumbling for the hidden latch Maria had shown her during the safety briefing. The bookshelf swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel barely lit by battery-powered emergency lights. Behind her, she heard the safe room door finally give way. Heard Maria's gunfire once, twice, 3 times. Heard a man's voice shout in Italian. Then she was in the tunnel, running blindly through the darkness with Antonio clutched to her chest, not knowing if she was running towards safety or into the arms of the enemy. Not knowing if Vincent was alive or dead. Not knowing if she'd ever get the chance to tell him that yes, God help her, she did love him. The tunnel seemed endless. But finally, Rachel saw light ahead. She burst out into the night air, finding herself in the woods behind the estate. In the distance, she could see flames rising from the mansion, could hear the sounds of combat. And then she heard something else. A car engine getting closer. Rachel turned to run deeper into the woods, but it was too late. The SUV screeched to a stop, and men poured out. Not Vincent's men. She knew that instantly from the way they moved, from the predatory smiles on their faces. One of them stepped forward, older with cold eyes and a smile that made Rachel's blood freeze. The famous wet nurse, he said in heavily accented English. Finally, take her. Rachel fought, screaming Antonio's name as hands grabbed her, but it was useless. They were professionals, and she was just a terrified nurse trying to protect a baby. The last thing she saw before they forced a cloth over her mouth was the mansion burning in the distance, smoke rising like a funeral pea into the dawn sky. Then darkness claimed her and Rachel Carter disappeared into the night with the Romano heir in her arms, wondering if the man she'd fallen for would even survive long enough to search for her. Rachel woke in a room that reeked of old money and older sins. Her head pounded from whatever they'd used to knock her out, but her first thought was Antonio. She bolted upright to find the baby sleeping peacefully in an antique bassinet beside the ornate bed where she'd been placed. Relief flooded through her. They hadn't heard him. Awake finally, the voice came from the shadows. The older man from the woods stepped into the light. I am Salvatore Benedetti, and you, my dear, are worth your weight in gold. Where are we? Rachel's voice was horror. My estate about 50 miles from the Romano mansion, or what's left of it. His smile was cruel. Don't worry. Your beloved Don is alive for now. I made sure word reached him about where to find you. Want him to come. Understanding dawned with horror. Of course. Vincent Romano destroyed my family 10 years ago. Killed my sons. Took my territory. Left me with nothing but scraps. And now he gestured to Antonio. Now he cares about something. Finally, after a decade of being untouchable, he has a weakness. 2 weaknesses, actually. He moved closer, and Rachel pressed herself back against the headboard. You and his precious heir. The sacred wet nurse, and the son who bears the Romano name. Tell me, does he love you? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play stupid. Salvatore's hand shot out, gripping her chin painfully. I've seen the reports. The way he looks at you, the way he's protected you. Vincent Romano hasn't cared about anything since his wife died. But he cares about you, and that is going to destroy him. He released her, smoothing his suit. He'll come for you tonight. I've made sure of it. And when he does, when he walks through those doors willing to trade everything for your safety, I'll take it all. His empire, his power, his life, everything. He'll kill you, Rachel said, trying to sound brave, perhaps. But first, he'll have to watch me hurt what he loves. And that will be worth dying for. The hours that followed were torture. Rachel stayed close to Antonio, feeding him when he cried, changing him with supplies Salvatore's people had thoughtfully provided. They wanted the baby healthy, wanted him as leverage when Vincent arrived. As dusk fell, Salvatore returned. He's here earlier than expected, actually. Your Don must be quite motivated. He hauled Rachel to her feet. Come, you'll want to see this. He dragged her to a large study. Antonio clutched in her arms and positioned her near the window where she could see the grounds below. Her heart stopped. Vincent stood alone in the center of the courtyard, illuminated by floodlights. No bodyguards, no weapons visible, his hands raised in surrender. But even from this distance, Rachel could see the coiled violence in his stance, the barely leashed fury in his posture. Benedetti, his voice carried clearly through the open window. I'm here. Let them go. Salvatore laughed. pushing Rachel closer to the window so Vincent could see her. The moment their eyes met across the distance, Rachel saw Vincent's mask crack. Raw emotion flooded his face. Relief, fear, love. Your empire for the woman and child, Salvatore called down. Sign over everything. Territory, businesses, operations, all of it. Make me Don of the Romano family, and I'll let them live. Vincent didn't hesitate. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt them. Rachel's eyes widened with shock. He was giving up everything. His entire world, his power, his legacy for her and Antonio. Touching. Salvatore sneered. But I think we both know I can't let you live, Romano. You just rebuild. Come after me. No, you have to die. But first, you'll watch me take everything. He pulled a gun, pressing it to Rachel's temple. Starting with her, everything happened in slow motion. Rachel saw Vincent move impossibly fast for someone who was supposed to be unarmed. His hand went to his ankle, came up with a weapon. At the same moment, Rachel did the only thing she could think of. She bit down hard on Salvatore's wrist, making him jerk the gun away from her head. The shot went wide. Glass shattered, and then the world exploded into chaos. Doors burst open and Vincent's men poured in. They'd been there all along, hidden, waiting. But Vincent himself was already inside, moving like death incarnate. Rachel had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful. Salvatore grabbed for her again, but Rachel was done being a victim. She swung Antonio's bassinet at his knee. Thankfully, the baby was still in her arms, and the old man stumbled. It was all the opening Vincent needed. You touched what's mine. Vincent snarled, and his fist connected with Salvatore's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. The fight was brutal, but brief. Salvatore was old, past his prime. Vincent was in his prime and fueled by fury. When it was over, Salvatore was on his knees, bleeding, defeated. Kill me, he spat. End it. Vincent leveled his gun at the old man's head. Rachel saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the monster, the killer, the Don who'd built his empire on violence. Vincent. Rachel's voice cut through the haze. He looked at her, and Rachel saw him, wearing with himself. Saw the darkness battling with the man she'd come to know. He tried to kill you. Vincent growled. He put his hands on you. On my son. I know. Rachel walked closer. Antonio sleeping miraculously in her arms. But if you kill him like this in cold blood while I watch, you'll lose yourself. And I need you. Not the Don, not the monster. We need the man. The silence stretched. Then Vincent lowered his gun. Take him, he ordered his men. Turn him over to the families. Let them decide his fate for breaking the old laws by targeting a sacred woman. As Salvatore was dragged away, screaming threats, Vincent turned to Rachel. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then he crossed the distance in 2 strides, pulling her and Antonio into his arms. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered into her hair. When I saw the safe room breached, when I couldn't find you, Rachel, I thought I'd lost you both. You found us. Rachel pulled back enough to look at his face. You gave up everything to save us. I'd give up everything 1,000 times over. He cupped her face with shaking hands. None of it matters without you. The empire, the power, the name, it all means nothing if you're not here. The families won't accept that, Rachel said. You can't just walk away from being a Don. Watch me. His eyes blazed with determination. I'm done with this life, Rachel. I'm done with violence and death and living in darkness. You made me want something more. Made me remember there's light in the world. But the Romano family has a successor waiting. Vincent's smile was grim. My cousin Antonio, yes, I named my son after him, has been angling for the position for years. He can have it. I'm taking my son and the woman I love, and I'm walking away. The woman you love. Rachel's heart hammered. Did you think I'd give up my empire for just anyone? He kissed her softly. I love you, Rachel Carter. I loved you when you offered to feed my son. Loved you when you stood in my world and refused to break. Love you now, standing here covered in glass and dust, still protecting my child. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. This is crazy. Probably. I've known you a week. Best week of my life. Your world almost got us killed. I'm leaving that world for you. For Antonio. He kissed her again deeper. Say you'll stay not for 3 days, forever. Be my wife, Rachel. Not because of traditions or sacred bonds, but because I love you and I hope you might love me, too. Rachel looked at this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man. Thought about her weak in his world. Thought about how alive she'd felt in his arms. Thought about Antonio sleeping peacefully against her chest. This child who'd healed something broken in her heart. I do love you, she whispered. God help me. Then say yes. 6 months later, Rachel stood in a small church in Montana, wearing a simple white dress with Antonio, now chubby and healthy, babbling happily in Maria's arms in the front pew. Nervous? Vincent asked, looking devastating in a dark suit, his hand warm in hers. Terrified, Rachel admitted, but in a good way. The wedding was small. Just Maria, Franco, and a handful of others who'd followed Vincent into his new life. Rachel's parents were there, too, cautiously accepting of their daughter's whirlwind romance with the reformed businessman who'd swept her off her feet. They didn't know the whole truth. Didn't need to. That part of Vincent's life was over. The vows were simple. No mention of Dawn or empires or sacred traditions. Just two people promising to love each other through whatever came next. When Vincent kissed her, Rachel felt complete for the first time since losing Lily. This was her family now. Her impossible, beautiful, miraculous family. The reception was held at their new home, a ranch house on 50 acres of Montana wilderness, far from New York and the life Vincent had left behind. As they danced under string lights, Antonio sleeping peacefully inside, Rachel marveled at how much had changed. Any regrets? She asked against Vincent's chest. Not one. He pulled back to look at her. Though I should warn you, Franco got a concerning call today. The family's found us. Vincent's jaw tightened. Nothing threatening. Just checking in, making sure we're really out. And are we? He kissed her forehead. I made my position clear. I'm done. The Romano family belongs to Antonio now. My cousin Antonio, I mean. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with the Council of Families, who by the way officially sanctioned my retirement. Because of me, Rachel understood. Because I'm sacred to them. Because you saved the Romano heir when no one else could. Because you prove that love is stronger than power. Vincent smiled. The old families respect that. They won't touch us. As if on cue, headlights appeared at the end of their long driveway. Rachel tensed, but Vincent squeezed her hand reassuringly. A single car pulled up and a man in his 60s stepped out, well-dressed, carrying himself with authority. Don Marchetti. Vincent greeted him with careful respect. This is unexpected. Relax, Romano. The older man smiled warmly. I come as a friend, not a threat. The families wanted someone to deliver this officially. He handed Vincent an envelope sealed with wax. Your retirement papers signed by all 5 families. You're free. Truly free. Vincent opened it. Rachel reading over his shoulder. It was a formal document releasing Vincent from all obligations to the Romano family and the wider organization. Thank you, Vincent said quietly. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. Don Marchetti nodded to Rachel. What she did for your son, that kind of love, that kind of sacrifice, it reminded us all why we have these traditions. Why we protect women and children above all else. She earned your freedom, Romano. Both of yours. He tipped his hat and left as quickly as he'd arrived. Rachel and Vincent stood in the driveway long after the tail lights disappeared, the document still clutched in his hand. It's really over, Rachel whispered. It's really over. Vincent pulled her close. New life, new beginning. Just us and Antonio. He smiled. And maybe someday a little brother or sister for him. Rachel's hand went to her stomach where their secret was still too new to be visible. Maybe sooner than you think. Vincent's eyes widened. Are you 3 weeks along? I wanted to tell you after the wedding. She bit her lip nervously. Is that okay? His answer was to sweep her into his arms and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, both of them were crying happy tears. More than okay, Rachel. You've given me everything. A reason to live, a reason to love, a future worth having. You gave me that, too. She kissed him softly. You and Antonio, you saved me when I thought I couldn't be saved. They stood in the Montana darkness, the stars brilliant overhead, with their past behind them and their future stretching ahead bright and full of possibility. Inside, Antonio let out a small cry. They broke apart with matching smiles. Parents now, partners, lovers, friends. He's hungry, Rachel said. Then let's go feed our son. Vincent took her hand together, the way it should be. As they walked inside, Rachel looked back once at the driveway where the dawn had delivered their freedom. at the dark trees beyond that hid nothing more dangerous than wildlife, at the stars that witnessed their happy ending. She'd walked into a storm 6 months ago on that airplane. She'd found the most dangerous man in America and fed his child. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, she'd found her home. Not in a place, but in a person. In a man who'd given up an empire for love. In a baby who'd needed her as much as she'd needed him. In a family built not on blood or tradition, but on choice. Rachel Carter had finally found where she belonged, and she was never letting go. 3 months after the wedding, Rachel woke to the soft sounds of Montana morning filtering through their bedroom windows. Birds chirped in the distance, cattle lowed somewhere across the pasture, and the familiar creak of the old ranch house settling into the day. But it was the gentle press of Vincent's lips against her neck that truly pulled her from sleep. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured against her skin, his voice still rough with sleep. His arm tightened around her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. "How are you feeling?" Rachel placed her hand over his, threading their fingers together. The morning sickness had been brutal for the past few weeks, but today felt different. "Better," she said softly. "I think the little one is finally giving me a break." Vincent's hand moved to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, barely noticeable at 4 months, but precious beyond measure to both of them. Their second child, a symbol of the life they'd built together, far from the darkness that had brought them together. "Antonio's up," Rachel observed, hearing the telltale sounds of their 15-month-old babbling to himself in his crib down the hall. He was an early riser, just like his father, though infinitely more cheerful about it. "I'll get him," Vincent said, pressing another kiss to her shoulder before reluctantly pulling away. "You rest." Rachel watched her husband pad across their bedroom, still marveling at how different he looked in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt. Gone was the expensive Italian suit, the perfectly styled hair, the aura of dangerous authority. In their place was a man who looked younger, more relaxed, genuinely happy in a way she suspected he'd never been before. Vincent returned minutes later with Antonio perched on his hip, the toddler's dark curls wild from sleep, and his eyes bright with the joy that seemed to come so naturally to children. The resemblance between father and son was striking, but where Vincent's eyes held the shadows of his past, Antonio's held only trust and love. "Mama." Antonio reached for Rachel, his favorite word tumbling from his lips with the clarity that had developed over recent months. His vocabulary was expanding daily, though Papa remained a close second in frequency of use. Vincent settled Antonio between them on the bed, the little boy immediately crawling toward Rachel for his morning cuddles. This had become their routine, these precious moments before the day truly began. No bodyguards, no business calls, no threats from the outside world. Just the three of them, soon to be 4, wrapped in the peaceful bubble they'd created. The phone rang, cutting through their domestic tranquility like a blade. Vincent's entire body went rigid, his hand automatically reaching for the nightstand where Rachel knew he still kept a gun, despite their new life. Old habits died hard. "I'll get it," Rachel said gently, seeing the tension that had suddenly appeared in his shoulders. "It's probably my mother. She said she'd call about Thanksgiving plans." But when Rachel picked up the phone, it wasn't her mother's cheerful voice that greeted her. Instead, a man's voice, heavily accented and formally polite, sent ice through her veins. "Mrs. Romano, I apologize for calling so early. This is Franco. I need to speak with Vincent. It's urgent." Vincent was already moving, taking the phone from Rachel's nerveless fingers. His face had transformed, the relaxed father and husband replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "Franco, what's wrong?" Rachel couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Vincent's expression grow increasingly grim. Antonio seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, moving closer to Rachel and watching his father with wide, uncertain eyes. When Vincent asked curtly, "How many?" his free hand clenched into a fist. "I see. No, don't handle it without me. I'll be there in 6 hours." "Vincent," Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "What's happening?" He ended the call and turned to face her, his dark eyes holding an apology she didn't want to see. "There's been an incident in New York. Someone tried to hit one of our old operations. 3 of our people are dead." "But you're retired," Rachel protested, even as she felt their perfect world beginning to crack around the edges. They can't drag you back into this. Vincent sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Rachel recognized as his attempt to control his temper. Officially, I'm out. But my cousin Antonio, he's young, inexperienced. The other families are testing him, seeing if the Romano name still carries weight. If they think he's weak, if they think the family is vulnerable, what does that have to do with us? But even as she asked the question, Rachel knew the answer. In Vincent's world, family was everything. Blood, tradition, loyalty. These weren't just concepts, but sacred bonds that couldn't be broken simply by moving to Montana. Vincent reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. I have to go back, just for a few days. Help Antonio establish his authority, make sure the family knows he has my support. Then I'll come home, and this will never happen again. Rachel felt their carefully constructed peace shattering like glass. She'd known this day might come, had sensed it in the way Vincent still tensed at unexpected phone calls, still kept weapons hidden throughout their home, still had Franco call every few weeks with updates he thought she didn't notice. You promised, she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to protect their unborn child. You promised that was behind us. And it is. Vincent leaned forward, cupping her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. Rachel, look at me. This is the last time. I need to make sure the family is strong enough to survive without me. That means ensuring Antonio can handle the responsibility. Once that's done, we'll truly be free. Antonio chose that moment to toddle over to Vincent, wrapping his small arms around his father's neck in an innocent gesture of comfort. The sight broke Rachel's heart. This was supposed to be their sanctuary, their safe place away from the violence and danger of Vincent's former life. How long? She asked, her voice stronger than she felt. 3 days. Maybe 4. Vincent's arms encircled both her and Antonio, holding them close. I'll take Franco and a small security team. In and out, nothing more. Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to beg him not to go, wanted to remind him of all the reasons he'd walked away from that life in the first place. But she also understood the weight of the obligations he carried. Vincent might have left the Romano family, but they would always be his blood, his responsibility. Promise me you'll be careful, she said finally, her forehead resting against his. Promise me you'll come home to us. I promise, he said, and she heard the vow in his voice, the absolute certainty that nothing would keep him from returning to them. I love you, Rachel. You and Antonio and this little one. He touched her belly gently. You're my whole world now. Everything I do is to protect that. 2 hours later, Rachel stood in their driveway holding Antonio as Vincent loaded a bag into the SUV Franco had arrived in. The sight of the black vehicle with its tinted windows brought back memories she'd tried to suppress, reminders of the world Vincent had fought so hard to leave behind. Franco nodded respectfully to Rachel, his demeanor as serious as she remembered from their brief encounters during the early days of their relationship. He'd been one of the few from Vincent's old life to make the transition to their new one, serving now as a general foreman for their ranch operations rather than an underboss for criminal enterprises. Mrs. Romano, Franco said quietly, I'll bring him home safely. You have my word. Rachel managed a smile she didn't feel. Take care of him, Franco, and take care of yourself. Vincent kissed her goodbye, his lips lingering against hers as if he were memorizing the feel of her. Then he kissed Antonio's forehead, whispering something in Italian that made their son giggle and reach for his face. I love you, Vincent said, his eyes holding hers. Both of you. I'll call tonight. And then they were gone, the SUV disappearing down their long driveway like a black specter carrying away her happiness. Rachel stood there until she couldn't see the dust cloud anymore, Antonio growing heavy in her arms as the Montana morning suddenly felt cold and empty. That evening, true to his word, Vincent called. But their conversation was stilted, carefully neutral, both of them aware that phones could be monitored, that the wrong words could put them all in danger. He was safe. He was handling the situation. He would be home soon. Everything else remained unspoken. On the second day, Maria arrived unannounced, her face grim with worry. Rachel had been grateful for the company, for someone who understood the particular anxiety that came with loving a man from that world. Even in retirement, even with the best intentions, danger had a way of finding them. He'll come back, Maria said simply, helping Rachel prepare lunch while Antonio played with blocks on the kitchen floor. Vincent Romano is many things, but he's not a fool. He knows what he has here. He knows what he'd be losing. But Rachel's fears proved justified on the third day when Franco called instead of Vincent. There had been complications, he explained in carefully chosen words. Additional meetings were required. The situation was more complex than originally anticipated. "Is he safe?" Rachel asked, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. "He's safe," Franco assured her. "But Mrs. Romano, there are people who don't want to see this resolved peacefully. People who see Vincent's retirement as weakness rather than wisdom. They're pushing for a more permanent solution." What does that mean? But Rachel was afraid she already knew. It means some people think the Romano family would be better off with Vincent back in charge permanently, and they're willing to create the kind of chaos that would make that seem like the only option. Rachel felt the baby flutter in her womb, as if sensing her distress. She placed her protective hand over the growing life inside her, thinking of all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways their carefully constructed peace could be destroyed. "Bring him home, Franco," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes. Bring him home to us." 3 more days passed in a haze of worry and sleepless nights. Antonio seemed to sense his father's absence, becoming clingy and fretful. Rachel found herself jumping at every sound, checking the locks obsessively, her nurse's training warring with her mother's instincts to protect her children at all costs. When the call finally came, it wasn't Franco or Vincent on the other end. It was a voice Rachel didn't recognize, cold and professional. "Mrs. Romano, my name is Detective Martinez with the NYPD. I need to speak with you about your husband." Rachel's world tilted on its axis. The phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the kitchen floor as every nightmare scenario she'd imagined came rushing back at once. Antonio looked up from his toys, his dark eyes wide with concern at his mother's obvious distress. It took Rachel 3 attempts to pick up the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Detective Martinez said quickly, and Rachel felt her knees give out with relief. "But Mrs. Romano, he's been arrested. There was an incident at a restaurant in Little Italy. 3 men are dead, and your husband was found at the scene with a weapon." The rest of the conversation passed in a blur. Lawyers, bail hearings, federal investigators taking an interest in what they perceived as Vincent Romano's return to his former life. Rachel managed to take down the necessary information, her mind already racing through the logistics of getting to New York, of finding someone to watch Antonio, of preparing for a battle she'd hoped never to fight again. After she hung up, Rachel sat in her kitchen surrounded by the remnants of the life they'd built together. Antonio's toys scattered on the floor, Vincent's coffee cup still sitting by the sink from the morning he'd left, her prenatal vitamins lined up on the counter like a promise of the future they'd planned. But promises, Rachel was learning, were fragile things in Vincent Romano's world. And the past, no matter how far you ran from it, had a way of dragging you back into its darkness. She looked down at Antonio, who had abandoned his toys to come sit beside her, his small hand patting her leg in an unconsciously comforting gesture. His father's eyes looked back at her, trusting and innocent, believing in a world where Daddy always came home and Mama could fix anything. Rachel made a decision that would have terrified her 6 months ago, but felt inevitable now. She was going to New York. She was going to fight for her husband, for their family, for the life they'd built together. Because Vincent Romano had given up everything for love, and Rachel Carter Romano wasn't about to let that sacrifice be in vain. The flight to New York felt like traveling back in time. Every mile brought them closer to the world Rachel had hoped to leave behind forever, the world of federal surveillance and family loyalty, of ancient codes and modern violence. Antonio slept fitfully in her arms, picking up on her tension despite her efforts to remain calm. Maria had insisted on coming with them, her maternal instincts overriding any concerns about returning to a place where her loyalties might be questioned. "Your family," she'd said simply when Rachel had protested. "And family doesn't face this kind of thing alone." The lawyer Vincent's cousin Antonio had hired was efficient and expensive, the kind of man who understood both the legal system and the unspoken rules that governed their particular corner of it. Vincent was being held without bail, he explained, pending a federal investigation into what the prosecutors were calling a return to criminal activity. But that's not what happened, Rachel protested. He went back to help his cousin, to prevent exactly this kind of violence. The lawyer, a thin man named Castellano, nodded sympathetically. I believe you, Mrs. Romano. But the federal prosecutor sees a man who supposedly retired from organized crime, found at a murder scene with 3 dead bodies and a smoking gun. They're calling it a relapse into old patterns. Rachel felt the walls closing in around them. Vincent's past, his reputation, his very name were being used against him, twisted into evidence of guilt rather than acknowledged for what they truly were, the burden of a man trying to protect a family he'd never wanted to lead in the first place. Can I see him? She asked. Castellano's expression softened slightly. Visits are limited, and they'll be monitored. But yes, I can arrange something for tomorrow. That night, Rachel lay awake in a Manhattan hotel room that cost more per night than most people made in a week, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city that had once been Vincent's kingdom. Antonio slept beside her, his small body warm and trusting against her side, unaware that their world was falling apart around them. The federal detention center was everything Rachel had feared it would be. Cold, institutional, filled with the kind of men Vincent had once commanded and now found himself imprisoned alongside. The visit was conducted through reinforced glass, their conversation monitored by guards who watched every gesture, every expression. Vincent looked tired, older than his years, his face bearing the strain of 3 days in custody. But his eyes lit up when he saw Rachel and Antonio. The love there so pure and fierce it made her chest ache. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice distorted by the speaker system. It's not safe for you here. Where else would I be? Rachel adjusted Antonio on her lap, making sure Vincent could see his son clearly. We're family. We face things together. Vincent's expression crumpled slightly, and for a moment Rachel saw not the dangerous man who'd commanded an empire, but the father and husband who'd found salvation in her arms. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I thought I could handle it without it touching our life. I was wrong. Tell me what happened, Rachel said. All of it. Vincent glanced at the guards, then back at her, choosing his words carefully. The meeting was supposed to be peaceful. A show of unity between the families, a way to demonstrate that my cousin had my backing. But someone had other plans. They wanted to make it look like I was coming back, like I was making a play for control. Who would want that? People who think a Romano civil war would benefit them. People who remember what this family used to be and want to either destroy it or control it for themselves. Vincent's hands clenched into fists against the metal table. I walked into a trap, Rachel. And now they're using my presence there to justify everything they've always suspected about my retirement. The visiting time passed too quickly, and Rachel found herself pressing her palm against the glass in a futile attempt to touch her husband. Antonio babbled happily, reaching for his father's face through the barrier, oblivious to the circumstances that separated them. Take care of him, Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. Both of them. Don't let this world touch them any more than it already has. I'm getting you out of here, Rachel said firmly. Whatever it takes. But even as she made the promise, Rachel wondered if it was one she could keep. The federal government had resources and determination that matched any crime family, and Vincent's past made him a prize they were unlikely to give up easily. Back at the hotel, Rachel called everyone she could think of who might be able to help. Vincent's legitimate business contacts, lawyers who specialized in federal criminal defense, even a private investigator who'd worked with the family during their transition to Montana. But the answers were all variations of the same theme. Vincent Romano's past made him a target, and his presence at a crime scene made him vulnerable in ways that money and influence couldn't easily fix. It was Maria who suggested the solution that would change everything. There's one person who might be able to help, she said quietly as they sat in the hotel room. Antonio finally asleep between them on the king-sized bed. Someone who has more influence with the federal authorities than any lawyer. Who? Rachel asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Don Marchetti. He's the one who negotiated Vincent's original retirement agreement. If anyone can convince them that Vincent was trying to prevent violence rather than cause it, it would be him. But reaching Don Marchetti proved more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The old man was careful, protective of his own position and reluctant to involve himself in what he saw as Vincent's personal problems. It took 3 days of negotiations through intermediaries before he finally agreed to meet with Rachel. The meeting took place in a restaurant in Little Italy, the irony not lost on Rachel that she was now sitting in the very neighborhood where her husband had been arrested. Don Marchetti was smaller than she'd expected, a man in his 70s with kind eyes and careful manners who looked more like someone's grandfather than a powerful crime boss. "Mrs. Romano," he said gently, taking her hand in a gesture that was both respectful and paternal. "I'm sorry for the circumstances that bring us together." "Please," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the desperation she felt. "Help me bring him home." Don Marchetti studied her for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "Your husband is a good man," he said finally. "He made choices that took courage, that put love before power. But the federal government sees only what they want to see, a man with a history returning to old patterns. Then help them see the truth. The truth, Mrs. Romano, is complicated. Vincent was set up, that much is clear. But by whom and why? Those are dangerous questions with dangerous answers. Questions that could implicate powerful people who prefer to remain in the shadows." Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. "You're saying there's a conspiracy?" "I'm saying that your husband's retirement threatened certain arrangements, certain balances of power that some people found inconvenient. His return to New York, even for legitimate reasons, provided an opportunity for those people to solve their problem permanently. What do you need me to do?" Don Marchetti's smile was sad and knowing. "You've already done it, my dear. You've reminded me why men like Vincent choose love over power, why some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible." 3 days later, Vincent Romano walked out of federal custody a free man. The charges hadn't been dropped, exactly, but new evidence had come to light. Security footage from a neighboring building that clearly showed Vincent arriving at the restaurant after the shooting had begun. Testimony from witnesses who'd been too afraid to come forward initially, but suddenly found the courage to tell the truth. Financial records that traced the setup to a rival family with connections to federal informants who'd been feeding information to create exactly this scenario. Rachel didn't ask Don Marchetti how he'd accomplished the impossible. Some gifts were too precious to examine too closely, some favors too dangerous to acknowledge explicitly. She simply accepted the miracle and held her husband close as they stood on the courthouse steps, Antonio babbling happily in Vincent's arms, unaware that he'd just gotten his father back from a nightmare. The flight home to Montana was quiet, all three of them exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the past 2 weeks. But as their plane descended toward the small regional airport, where Franco waited with their truck, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced since Vincent had first left for New York. Peace. Home looked different somehow, more precious and fragile than it had before. The ranch house with its wide porches and weathered wood, the pastures where their cattle grazed peacefully, the mountains rising like protective guardians in the distance. This was what they'd fought for, this simple, beautiful life far from the complications of power and blood and ancient obligations. That night, after Antonio was asleep in his crib and the house was quiet around them, Vincent and Rachel lay in their own bed and talked about everything that had happened. The trap that had been set, the enemies who'd revealed themselves, the price of the freedom they'd thought they'd already paid. "It's over now," Vincent said, his arms around Rachel, one hand resting on the growing curve of their second child. "Really over this time." Don Marchetti made it clear to everyone involved that any further attempts to drag me back into that world will be met with consequences no one wants to face. "And you believe him?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his breathing steady against her hair. "I believe that loving you and Antonio and this little one has made me dangerous in ways I never was when I was just a Don with an empire. Because now I have something worth destroying the world to protect." 5 years later, Rachel stood on the front porch of their ranch house, watching Vincent teach 7-year-old Antonio how to properly saddle his pony, while 3-year-old Sophia supervised from her perch on the fence rail. Their daughter had inherited her father's dark eyes and stubborn streak, but her mother's compassionate heart and healing touch. Even at 3, she showed remarkable gentleness with injured animals and an intuitive understanding of when someone was hurt or sad. The years had been good to them. Vincent's legitimate businesses had flourished, the ranch had become profitable, and Rachel had established a small clinic in the nearby town where she treated everything from childhood ear infections to ranching accidents. They'd built exactly the life they'd dreamed of that first night in the nursery when everything had seemed impossible. There had been challenges, of course. Sophia's birth had been complicated, requiring an emergency section that had terrified them both. Antonio had inherited enough of his father's protective instincts to occasionally get into fights defending classmates from bullies, leading to parent-teacher conferences that reminded them their son would always carry something of Vincent's world inside him. And there were still occasional reminders of their past, federal agents who showed up asking routine questions, old associates who needed legitimate business references, the careful dance of remaining visible enough to avoid suspicion while maintaining the privacy that kept them safe. But they'd weathered it all together, their love growing stronger and deeper with each challenge overcome. Vincent had become the father and husband Rachel had glimpsed in those early days, tender and protective without being controlling, strong without being violent. And Rachel had discovered reserves of courage and determination she'd never known she possessed, the strength that came from defending something precious and irreplaceable. Vincent looked up from the pony's saddle, catching her watching them with that soft smile she reserved for perfect moments. Their eyes met across the yard, and even after all these years, she felt that familiar flutter of attraction and affection, the bone-deep certainty that this man, this life, this family was exactly where she belonged. Antonio, now old enough to understand his family's history in broad strokes, had once asked if his father regretted giving up being a Don to become a rancher. Vincent had considered the question seriously before answering. Power, he told his son, means being able to make other people do what you want, even when they don't want to do it. But love means choosing to do what's best for the people you care about, even when it's hard. Even when it means giving up things that seem important. He'd looked at Rachel then, his eyes holding all the warmth and wonder that still surprised her sometimes. And I'd rather have love than power any day. Now, watching her family in the golden light of a Montana evening, Rachel thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate infant's cries on an airplane. A moment of compassion that had seemed like madness. A choice to trust love over fear, hope over despair, the future over the past. She'd lost one daughter to circumstances beyond her control, but she'd gained a family beyond anything she'd ever imagined possible. A husband who'd literally given up an empire for her love. A son who carried the best of his father's strength without any of his darkness. A daughter who embodied pure joy and possibility. And soon, if the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning was accurate, another child to add to their growing family. Vincent caught her eye again and grinned, the boyish expression that still had the power to make her heart race. Sophia called out for her attention, demanding that Mama come see how high she could count while Antonio worked with his pony. And Rachel Romano, née Carter, the woman who'd once been too broken to imagine a future, walked down the porch steps into the warm embrace of the life she'd never dared to dream possible. The past would always be part of their story. Vincent's grandfather's traditions, the sacred bonds formed when a stranger had nursed a Don's child, the price paid in blood and sacrifice for the right to choose love over power. But the future belonged to them now, bright and endless as the Montana sky, filled with all the beautiful possibilities that came from choosing to build something better than what you'd inherited. Rachel Carter Romano had finally found where she belonged, surrounded by the family she'd gained from one moment of unthinkable kindness, one choice to help a desperate father and his crying child. And she was never, ever letting go.